marketing or promoting a play, or a musical for that matter, can be almost as important as the structure and the form of the play itself. For a producer of a theater piece must decide who he's trying to reach, who is the base, and also to draw on those people who maybe have never been to the theater. And there are two aspects of the theatrical world that concentrate on that. We're talking about a publicist, a press agent, and the advertising agency. We were in Los Angeles recently, where we had the privilege of interviewing a leading press agent, David Elzer. And today in our studio, we have with us a gentleman named Randy Snow, who is an executive with R&R Partners, who are arguably the largest advertising agency on the West Coast and in Washington, D.C. We will talk with both of them, and they will focus in on how you sell a show to various and sundry audiences and studying the demographics of who they are and where they are. My name is Mike Merrick, and I'm a theater producer. And today we will give you an insight in how to sell the product that's on that stage in this segment of Producing for the Theater. Today, in our studio, I am indeed most privileged to work again with my very good friend, Mr. Nate Bynum, who is a professor of theater at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and who teaches a course in acting for the camera. Nate, it's terrific to have you here.
Always
Thank
good
you
to be
very
here.
much.
Thank you.
And our guest here today, our guest authority, I should say, is Mr. Randy Snow, who is an executive with an outstanding theatrical agency, advertising agency, and who has done many plays and advertised plays. And we welcome you and thank you for being with us.
It's my first time meeting you, Randy, so welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Good to have you. Let's talk about your experience first,
Okay.
because I want to acquaint the audience with who you are and what exactly it is that you do. So could we talk about your title
Sure.
at the company and also your experience with theater as well?
My title at the company is Executive Vice President, Creative Director. I pretty much run the creative department agency-wide. My experience with theater goes way, way back, way into my past. I promoted a show, Carol Channing's Hello, Dolly, Dick Van Dyke, Music Man.
Some people may remember that. Just maybe.
Yeah, they did. A few people.
It's a classic.
Yeah. I've worked more recently on some other more esoteric shows, Blue Man Group, We Will Rock You, doing some work right now for a production of The Producers that's coming into town. So I've done a fair amount of work for shows. It isn't all we do and all I do, but that's always been a part of what.
When you say a fair amount, that's some pretty big projects.
Yeah, yeah. Big projects and big stars, big names.
So I'm curious, when someone comes to you and they're asking you to promote their project, to make the public aware of it, what goes to your mind? What's the first thing that you do in order to help them?
In any type of advertising, whether it's theater or packaged goods or anything, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, who are we talking to? Who's the audience? And what makes them tick? What is going to motivate them to want to spend their evening, their money with you for 2 hours in your theater? What is relevant to them? And until you know what makes your customer tick, what's out there, what matters to them, what they like, what they enjoy, what they don't care about, you're really just stabbing in the dark. So that's the key. Before you even know your product, you have to know who your audience is. Absolutely.
And if it involves a play, it also involves, I guess, you're reading the play, getting an idea of what it's about and what that target audience is. And you're asking questions then of writers, producers.
Sure. And I say that it's most important to know your audience. The second most important thing is to know your product. Because on the one hand, you have to know what your audience wants. On the second hand, you have to know what your product delivers. Where those two things converge is where the magic happens and where you can be relevant and motivating to people. So you have to know about the show. Is the appeal of the show in its brand name? Is the appeal of the show in its music? Is the appeal of the show in its humor? Are people going to recognize the star? Do people know the show? There are so many questions about the show. And you basically just match the benefits of the show with the desires that the product that the people out there in the audience have. And if somebody wants blue men making jokes without dialogue, okay, then you just match that with the show and you sell tickets.
Let me ask you a question, Randy, pertaining to that and expanding on it. Does an ad agency have a differing or a slightly formulated approach to one audience as opposed to another? For example, regular theater goers, people who go to the theater all the time, who buy subscriptions, etc., and trying to develop a young, newer audience.
In terms of regular theater goers, you can assume a certain base of knowledge with them. You don't necessarily, if you're selling a Phantom of the Opera or The Producer or something, you can pretty much assume they have an idea what you're talking about, what it is. Brand new people, young people, people who haven't lived in theater environments or theater cities, you got to kind of walk them step by step. This is live theater, it's on the stage, people are actually going to sing and speak. You'd be surprised how much people don't know.
Yes.
If they're not a theater audience.
Yes. You know, it's strange, but as I mentioned earlier at our introduction, when we were in Los Angeles quite recently, we spoke with a publicist, and Nate and I want to get into how a publicist relates to an ad agency, etc. And we asked that publicist named David Elzer how you formulate the concept of a play and how you sell it. And I'd like us to look in on that for a moment.
Well, you start by reading the play or the musical, and Marketing 101 is simply what are you selling? So you need to know exactly what it is the show is, and then you need to know how are we going to sell it and who are we going to sell it to. Different shows have different audiences, and so you want to find what audience is the right audience for that particular show and then target that audience and go after them.
And so he agrees with everything you said, pretty much is the same wording. This Marketing 101, I guess, is a concept that you all
pretty much
walk around with.
Let's talk about the basics. But what I want to know from an ad agency expert and experienced guy such as yourself is how you relate to publicists. Now, publicists, for one of our audience, they may not understand the difference between ad agencies and publicists. Before I got started as a producer, you should excuse the expression.
Is that a curse word in the business?
Some people, yeah, damn right. I was a press agent for a long time. And I guess the basic way to define it is publicity people get space.
Right.
And advertising, well, I don't even want to call it that, but they get space and they get interviews and things of that nature that promote their product for nothing. An ad agency has to create a concept whereby you buy time on television, radio, the internet, which we'll get into, and you buy space in newspapers. And now, Nate and I found out, maybe you knew it, but I was shocked, and I shouldn't be, that a full page in the New York Times costs $100,000.
No, I didn't know that. I mean, that's extreme from my point of view. But I'm curious about those titles you just threw out, though. I mean, I know nothing about what the overlap may be between publicity agent and press agent and advertising agent. They're not the same.
No, they aren't. The prime difference, and Mike hit it, is a publicity agent or a public relations agent. They are getting what's called earned media, where they create interviews, they create news, they create PR releases.
So they're calling columnists, and they're
right, but they don't pay for the space. A writer writes about it, a television show does a piece on it, and you can direct where you're going with that, but you can't absolutely say what page that's going to appear on or what show that's going to appear on. We do paid media. We buy the space. So we can absolutely say we're going to be in this show on this break.
And you control the content.
And we control the content. We also control, in a sense, the audience.
Right.
We can decide whether or not we want it on the business page or on the sports page. We can decide whether or not we want it in main news or in entertainment. We can decide whether or not we want it on Friends or a rerun of Jeopardy. So we can pinpoint the audience more, and in return for that, we pay. So we do control the message completely. But if it's working well, there's a nice synergy between the so-called earned media and the paid media. Because if you're a consumer out there, you're going to see paid advertising for what it is. Okay, they bought this space, they're the logo there, they're going to tell me what they want to say. I understand that. But if I read something from a reviewer or a reporter, that's what we call third-party validation. That's somebody without a financial stake in the outcome. He or she is just giving his opinion or reporting a story. That does add to it. The two, when it's clicking, the two work together very, very nicely.
This is all under the larger heading of marketing and publicity.
I would say so. Yes, it falls under marketing marketing, there's no question about it, but I think that another thing about an ad agency is that people like Randy Snow, creative people such as he, have more control. We'll tell you what we want to say, because a press agent pitches a story about a show. And he does a wonderful job pitching it. And he says, okay, we'll do a story, we'll interview the director and the star, etc. And you never really know what's going to turn out. It could turn out to be a little bit negative, right?
That's absolutely true.
And so when you get this play, which you've read and you have some idea of how it will appeal to whatever particular audience, you then decide which newspaper, what kind of people read that newspaper, or what section of that newspaper may be right for this particular show, or what magazine.
What radio station we might want to buy, what kind of production we might want to put on that radio station, or there may be a number of radio stations. We may buy, we did a show called We Will Rock You, which was based on the music of Queen. Well, that would absolutely suggest a different radio buy than Mamma Mia, for instance. It's just because the music is different, the experience is different, therefore the audience is
And that's called the sell? I mean, what particular kind of sell you're trying
absolutely.
to get?
So yeah, again, you're just trying to match, as our publicist friend said, you're trying to match the product with its correct and most available audience. And you can do that through media placement as well.
We spoke earlier, and we didn't want to do a lot of this, I know, but we were curious about what sells in Las Vegas versus what sells nationally. Is there a different kind of sell for this city?
The thing that we have to remember here in Las Vegas is we're not dealing with a New York audience, a really theater-savvy audience.
You would define New York as a really theater-savvy audience?
Probably, along with London, probably the most theater-savvy audience on the planet.
And Las Vegas is something different?
Las Vegas is much more middle American, much more mainstream. People build an evening around dinner and gambling and messing around and maybe a show. In New York, people tend to build the evening around that show. That becomes the primary experience of the day. In Las Vegas, it's one of many.
Yeah. Nate and I have spoken about this a number of times, but I think audiences today, whether it be regional theater, which is very, very important, but audiences in centers like San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, where I know you've worked, Washington, D.C., where I know that you're involved, etc., do concentrate on going to the theater for theater's sake.
Absolutely.
So it's the funny thing is that I want to get back to David Elzer, who has some commentary pertaining to how you sell a star, how you sell sexuality in a show. What are the problems with that? I'd like us to take a look at that and see how you, as an advertising agency executive, would deal with that aspect of it. So if we could see something about Elzer talking about selling that aspect of a theater piece, it might be important for all of us.
Well, there are different types of sells that you have for any different entertainment product, whether it's a movie, a play, a musical. The star sell, certainly if you have a star, is a compelling sell. If you have a show that is a drama, you might want to go for a sophisticated sell, or often, you might want to go for the sex sell, which is also a very compelling sell. You want to do whatever you can to cut through the clutter. In various markets, whether it's New York or Los Angeles, I'm going to speak to Los Angeles particularly because that's what I know best. We have 40 to 50 shows open every single week in the city. 40 to 50, and a lot of them are brand new shows. So how do you cut through the clutter and get your show noticed, or make the most noise about your particular product? And that really depends on, again, what your show is and what the most compelling sell for that show is. Sometimes what you're selling in the show isn't necessarily what the show is, because the sell can sometimes be completely different from the show. For example, if there's a show that's a very, very dark drama, you might want to sell the triumph of the human spirit, as opposed to the fact that everybody's going to die in the end, because nobody wants to buy everybody dies in the end, but they do want to sell something that ultimately might be uplifting. So it really depends on the product. With a show that I worked on out in Los Angeles called Utopia, obviously we were, which is great because a title is really important, I think, as you move forward in trying to sell theater or sell anything. A show that has a title like Questa, another show that I'm working on currently, is a much harder sell because people don't know what it is that they're buying. A show like Utopia, which is very successful right now, you almost know just by hearing the name of the show what it is you're buying. Menopause the Musical, you know exactly what it is you're buying. A show like Naked Boys Singing, you know what it's. So when you have so much product out there, I think, you know, as producers or who look towards product to produce and move forward with, you know, I think that a title is critically important in the marketing of the show.
Well, based on that, you as a publicity, public relations, marketing expert, if somebody comes to you and says, I want you to handle this play, this musical, and you think the title in itself is not that commercial,
Yes.
would you say, wait a moment, you have to change the title?
I do. I do. I have. I did on Questa. The artistic people involved, it was non-negotiable. So then you do what you can to overcome that. Questa has Wendy Malick, who is going to be starring in that, Dorian Harewood and Dan Laria. So for that show out here, I will be going for the star sell and hoping that the star sell, because we have names from motion picture and television involved in that show, will overcome that title. You know, because you have to spend an awful lot of time otherwise trying to explain what is Questa. So I came up with copyline that actually sort of tied into the fact that Questa is a place, which was where forgiveness and redemption meet, Questa. So at least people know
where forgiveness and redemption meet.
Yes.
That's good.
So, you know, to do whatever you can to try to sort of overcome some of those challenges. Again, that's a sophisticated star sell that I'm going with that show, but I'm lucky enough to have names that are recognizable in that.
Where does the first agreement begin? You decided on a theme, and the producer has agreed this is the theme that we're working with, and then you decide on what the sell is. What are you marketing here? Sex, or the star, or some aspect, or some other aspect of the play?
Yeah, it all goes together. It's I don't have quite the problems that David had, because I've never worked on a show that's absolutely brand new, that isn't already somewhat of an established brand name. I've worked on shows like The Producers, We Will Rock You, where the name is already pretty much established and it's pretty well known, and it's already run on Broadway or in London or both. But no, there has to be a general agreement among everybody involved that this is how we're going to approach this. We're going to approach it with a sex sell or a star sell, or we're going to let the brand name of the show sell itself. And oftentimes, at least in my experience, it's been fairly obvious. There hasn't been a whole lot of disagreement over which way to go with any particular show and its audience.
But it's not one idea being promoted. You come with several ideas.
Not necessarily. What happens is you agree on a concept, like we're going to sell sex, or we're going to sell the star, or we're going to sell the plot, or we're going to sell the music. Then, once you agree on that concept, then there's a lot of ways to make that happen, and you bring all kinds of different ideas to the table. We could do it this way, we could do it this way, we could use music, we could use humor. There are a lot of ways to attack a product or a target, but you have to agree first on what we have a thing at the agency called the communications brief, and the most important line on it is the one thing. And the one thing for us is, after somebody sees your advertisement, you want them to walk away with one thought in their mind: what is that? And that's what we have to agree with producers, with the client, with everybody before we get going.
Or I want to see that. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, I think it's a bit easier for an advertising agency to sell something than it is for a publicist, because a publicist does not have the control that you guys have. You guys buy an ad, you do a commercial, you do something, nobody's going to play with that. As I said a moment ago, when they set up something, they say, isn't that wonderful, I got the star, I got the writer, and all of a sudden some journalist says, oh, I don't want to do that, and takes a little swing at you. You say, oh my God, it didn't turn out as well as I thought.
And that's absolutely right. You just, from the publicity, public relations side of things, there is a certain level of control you give up. On the other hand, you don't pay for the space.
Well, that's right. But there has to be a unison as far as thematic value is concerned between the ad agency and the publicist. Because if publicist goes one way, ad agency goes another way, it's ludicrous. They're fighting it, totally different themes.
And they're all in the same room.
Oh, yeah.
And they're all discussing this.
That's
so
right.
Who's the final say on this? Would that be the producers?
I would say, without a question.
You ever had a situation where people were going in different directions and you had to make a decision?
Well, yeah, but usually the producer says, here's the way I want to sell it, because the producer is running the show, consequently. Now, there are certain things that David Elzer mentioned between, for example, let's say a publicist has a problem between a director and a playwright, or a director and a star, and they have to get over the director may say, well, I don't want him getting all that space or her getting all that space, and I'm a big name director, and why don't I get it? How do they deal with that? It's different in the ad agency. I'd like to listen to a few moments of David, just a few moments, of talking about that aspect of the difficulty between getting what the producer really has a right to, well, demand, if you will.
Compromising.
And that's right. The compromising situation is vitally important. If we can just take a look at that for a moment, it might help all of us, you know.
A lot of marketing is compromise. A lot of anything in theater is compromise. I may have what I consider a really strong campaign for a show, but the producer, the director don't like it, so there's a lot of back and forth because, you know, if the producer is paying the bills, they need to be happy as well. And there are times that I will fight aggressively for what I believe in, and there are times you need to know that this isn't the battle to choose. Well, but ultimately, if you're in marketing, a lot of the responsibility for selling tickets falls onto your shoulders, and you need to, at the end of the day, be able to justify what and why it is that you went in the direction that you went in.
I also think it's to your advantage and to the advantage of people that hire you.
Yes.
Because you have and are producing certain things. Consequently, you know the problems that are inherent within the formation of mounting a play.
Sure, and at the end of the day, if tickets aren't selling, you know, if it isn't working out the way everybody wants it to work out, you at least know, gentlemen, you know, ladies, at the beginning of the process, I told you the risks inherent with having a title like this, with going for a sell like this if it's not the sell that you think is the most compelling and most interesting sell for your show. So I think it is always best to be upfront and to be honest about your feelings.
You've also got a very, you see, going back to titles, you've got a very provocative title, the deal Jewtopia.
Yes.
You know.
Oh, well,
it's an eyebrow raiser.
And I think it tells you what you're buying. I think that's so, and I think that why you see in New York so many movies being made into plays and musicals now, because it just makes it easier. When you have Hairspray, when you have Dirty Rotten Scoundrels or Spam, you know, even before the reviews come out, you have some familiarity with that product, which is why I think so many producers are going that route, you know, to find titles and brand names.
Which is a reverse of the old procedure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, just because it's financially crazy now from a marketing and publicity point of view to launch these plays. When the New York Times, a full page ad is $100,000, you know, for a one shot in the New York Times, it's, you know, how are you, again, going to cut through the clutter?
He just brought up a point that I mentioned briefly a few moments ago, and that is the unfortunate escalating costs of buying space, time, etc. How do you, as an ad agency executive with your vast experience, combat that at this juncture? I mean, is there a way of maybe doing something else? For instance, I want to ask you about brand names and things of that nature, which are coming to the fore. Is there any kind of an answer to that?
It's in terms of the cost of media, no.
Okay.
Media costs what it is. You can work around that. You can say, I don't need the full page in the New York Times.
Right.
I can do one of the new outre terms in advertising is guerrilla marketing, where you paint sidewalks or you post posters. Yeah, you do things out of home. You try to generate buzz, internet buzz. There are ways to try to get around it. But if you want that full page, if you need that full page, that's the price. And which, by the way, makes it difficult from an ad agency standpoint, because the higher the cost, the less a client is willing to take a risk.
Sure.
Cost and risk aversion have an absolute 100% correlation. And edgy ideas, different ideas, if you're going to spend $100,000, they're a little bit less likely to go for the edgy idea. And I understand that. That's a lot of money.
Is that one of the reasons you think that the internet is becoming increasingly more important in the promotion of a show that they've never really done before until a couple of years ago? Because the cost is not that prohibitive, and yet everybody goes to the internet.
The internet, it used to be, when we were working with any client, whether it was a show or any product, we would talk about TV, we'd talk about print, we'd talk about outdoor. Then, well, is there anything we can do with the internet? Now the discussion starts with the internet.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Much cheaper.
Absolutely, it's cheaper, and you're not constrained by time and space. Whereas on television, you have 30 seconds to get your job done.
Right.
On the internet, if you can create what the internet people call stickiness, they'll stay with you as long as you want. And you can show clips from the show, you can play music, you can have interactive games. It's, we're all tired of the term interactive, but it is. It absolutely is, and that's why the internet is so strong, because it turns somebody from a passive observer to an active participant.
I see the same thing being done now with cell phone. This information that comes across
I don't know
cell
anything
phones.
about that at the moment.
I get announcements from different companies now. I did do an 800 block now on cell phones, but there's also a new convention that's being used.
Text messages as well.
Text messaging as well.
Yeah.
But you know what struck me in that last piece that we saw? He mentioned the term campaign. As if, and I was thinking of politics and the war room.
Sure.
And of course, if that's the case, then there's a foe, there's an enemy that you're trying to defeat. Who would that be if the idea is for the bottom line is ticket sales?
The enemy is empty seats.
Empty seats.
Absolutely. That's the enemy.
Very well put. And a show that gets bad reviews, the enemy is the critic.
That's the critic.
Because there have been many shows that have gotten bad reviews that have fought the critics and won. One of them is, most people don't know this, Les Miserables.
Got bad reviews early?
Oh my God, yeah. They knocked the hell out of it, and boom, it went. Evita got terrible reviews. How many years did that run? But they had the money to fight.
That's it.
That's what you need. You need the money to campaign and to fight.
Is that part of the campaign thought, that you may get a bad review?
Sure.
And you have to have some way to sort of oppose that or go against that.
Yeah, you do, and and reviews are a part of life, and you get good ones and you get bad ones, and a lot of shows, I'm assuming, have gotten good reviews and still have failed.
That's right.
Because they weren't promoted well, or they just didn't click with the right audience, or whatnot.
Or they were esoteric, and the critics said, "Oh, it's absolutely marvelous," and the average theater goer didn't like it.
So the game isn't over when you get a bad review.
Not
other angles you're
But then
pursuing.
it also depends on a phrase called contingency fund. It depends on how much you have in that contingency fund, which is a producer's job, in your budget. And what's it for? You want to get down to the bare necessity? It's to fight bad word. Word of mouth is very important. Bad reviews, you've got to fight all the way. You need money for that.
With that in mind, then there's a plan A on how you're going to promote this particular show. Is there a plan B then when things fall apart and you have to do it a different way?
There's always a plan B.
Has to be.
There's always a plan B, and you always have to go into a situation knowing that everything might not go right this time, because it's very seldom that it does.
And they've changed their whole approach
Absolutely.
sometimes, radically.
And if you're smart and you have the funds, when you're, and I'm assuming a lot of producers do this, you do research at the theater. You talk to people. You talk to people leaving the theater. What did you like? What didn't you like? Did it work for you? Didn't it work for you? What were your favorite parts? Your most important source of information are your audience. Absolutely.
So there's exit polling.
We do it all the time, and all kinds of
Vitally
events.
important.
Yeah,
vitally important.
It's because that's whose opinion. A critic is one man, one woman. He has his or her own opinion. The opinions that matter are the people that bought the ticket. And if something struck them that they really liked, or really brought, or going to really bring home to their friends and neighbors, then okay, that might be plan B. We sold this, but they all told us about that. Maybe we should sell that.
So it may switch from a sex sale to a star sale,
You
or
never
a
know.
star sale
You
to
may
some
say
other content
right in the
sale.
middle.
Right.
One of the things I brought up very briefly that I want to ask you about, because it falls strictly into your category of endeavor, and that is the brand name thing. Now, you know this as well as I do, maybe better. Very recently, Transamerica, this big Goliath insurance company, promoted a play called something Feet, Hot Feet, or something like that. Yeah. It died a death. But they put a lot of money into it. They were very happy, because everywhere you went, they said, Transamerica, Transamerica, Transamerica. What is your feeling with an advertising agency concentrating on brand names within the formation of a play?
Brands are invaluable if you have them. In other words, if you, and this is my experience again, the first play I ever worked on was Carol Channing in Hello, Dolly. That's a brand. It's an established brand.
Oh, sure.
And there's power and value in that that's inestimable. You can't do better than that. The harder thing is with a new show. that
Sure.
doesn't have a brand, because then you have to create. Brand is nothing more than the relationship between a product and its audience,
Unless you have a big star.
unless you have a big star. But then the star is the brand.
Well, Julia Roberts very recently did a play that was a revival of a very old play. Initially got very bad reviews. She herself did bad reviews, and they had standing room only every night because they wanted to see her.
Right.
And I give her credit for that. Though.
I will say this about a brand. If you get a brand that is Phantom of the Opera or Julia Roberts, it's almost review proof.
Absolutely. Critic proof.
Critic proof.
You're absolutely
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
That's quite true. And then the final words from David Elzer, I think, had to do with the relationship between publicists and ad agency and everything of that nature. And it's just a quick little look. We take a look at that before we finish up our discussion. But I think this blending of publicists and ad agency is very, very important, especially to the neophyte, to the student, to people that don't know that much about advertising or publicity, and producers who don't know that much about it. And there are a lot of us around, sometimes including me, believe you me. But let's take a look at what David said in the closing moments that we interviewed him.
Well, when you have a show that's large enough, like The Lion King or most of the Broadway shows where you have a large ad agency working on the show as well, most of the time someone like me would be hired exclusively as the publicist. Certainly there are marketing meetings that the publicist is included in, and your opinion is asked for, whether it's for what are the quotes that you think you should pull for the ads. Right. And at that time you can also give suggestions about maybe copy lines for the pieces of material, what the pieces of material should be, are the materials working, should we freshen up a piece of material. So your voice does get heard, but it really is the ad agency that takes the lead on all of that and ultimately makes the final decisions on what the advertising, the look, and the campaign is going to be, and then it is my job as the press agent just to secure many features, as many reviews, as much buzz, column items, television, radio, internet as I can.
And what you do is you select if I can call it the real quality ingredients within the structure of a play or a musical, whether it be a personality, whether it be a playwright, whether it be a director, and how they came to evolve into the hopefully successful event that you're doing.
Yes, that's absolutely right. You know, again, within the package of what it is that you're selling, what is the most compelling sell? What is the thing that is going to grab a consumer and make them want to pay attention to this particular project? And again, that can be the star, it can be the title, it can be the concept, and whatever it is, you need to find out what you think the most interesting sell is and hit it over the head as hard as you can.
Or all of them combined.
Or all of them combined, absolutely. If you have Jessica Lange in A Streetcar Named Desire, I mean, you've got star, you've got title, you can have a really sexy campaign. I mean, you can take all of those elements and you can sell the sex, the star, and the show all in one great campaign.
Well, that kind of sums it up. But one thing I want to ask you from an ad agency point of view, and this has been an ongoing controversy for a long time. The critic. Nate and I interviewed a critic here in one of our shows. But how important is the critic? How important the quotes that you guys, that the producers, and the press agent, and everybody together, because it is a collaborative effort, as much as theater is a collaborative effort to get it on the stage, selling it should be a collaborative effort as well. Some producers know what they're doing, some don't, but that's beside the point. But you, the experts, the ad agency guy, the publicity guy, say we're going to sell it this way. How important are critical quotes in your estimation to sell a show and to help a show?
I think it varies on the show and where it's being performed. I think that in a place like New York, Los Angeles, London, where you have a very savvy audience, they are going to pay very special attention to what critics say. I think I've never worked on a show where we haven't done quote ads, critic ads. On the other hand, in a place like Las Vegas, where our audience literally turns over every 3 days, we're selling brand names like Mamma Mia.
There are no critic
Phantom.
ads.
It
doesn't mean a thing.
It's really pointless. It's about the brand name. It's about the show.
It's a whole different world.
It is, and it's, to somebody in Des Moines, Iowa, or Lynchburg, Kentucky, I don't know if a critic from the New York Times or the London Times is going to make a difference.
You happen to be right about that.
Someone in New York, absolutely.
I'll tell you what does make a difference, and I want to ask Nate's opinion about this because he's been involved with it. Getting names to tour. I had the privilege of years ago of working with Richard Burton. Richard Burton appeared in Chicago. Forget about it. They could have said the worst thing in the world. You couldn't get it. We played a 3,000-seater. How many people in Chicago, places of that size, it's an important city, see these huge film stars, regardless of what people may say about Tom Cruise lately, and a lot of it may be negative. I guarantee you that Tom Cruise went on a stage, you couldn't get near the place.
That's right.
How do you advertise that? Do you lessen it? Do you increase it? What do you do?
If you have a star of that magnitude,
Yes.
you're crazy if you don't lead with it. Because you spoke about Julia Roberts. I don't remember the name of the play she was in, but I remember it was her in it.
Yeah.
And if you ask, I bet you could talk to people in line outside the theater. What's the name of this play? I don't know. Who's the star? Julia Roberts.
Oh, yeah, they want to see Julia Roberts. You're absolutely right. That's what they want to do.
Star power can overcome anything.
But real theater doesn't really need a star. Real valuable theater, things in New York like the History Boys,
Right.
Doubt, Proof, dramas. See, that's why they would never go in Las Vegas.
Absolutely
They go
not.
in theaters, they go into metropolitan centers where people want to see something that really gets them going. Nate, do you agree with that?
We did, and you're aware of this, we did Annie, I think 2 years ago here at the university. And Sally Struthers was
Yes.
the star, I mean, the name. Annie sold well, they told me, some years earlier when they had done the show, and sold equally well with Sally. So it really wasn't a name that made the ticket sales increase. But the locals who came, and when those who talked about the show itself, they always mentioned the fact that she was in the show.
Oh, yes.
They were going to want to come see the show regardless, but when they talked about the show, it wasn't the show so much as much as it was she was in the show, and they had a connection with her, seeing her live. So you know, if it's a big show, it may not make as big a difference. But if it's a show with a star and still a big show,
Yeah.
it can make a difference with locals having some access to the people they believe are stars.
I think
right?
so. The last time I was in London, they had just mounted a production of Guys and Dolls with Ewan McGregor and Jane Krakowski. And the Guys and Dolls part of it was kind of an oh, by the way. All the advertising I saw, just Ewan McGregor was as big as it could get.
And the funny thing is, you're quite right, at the Piccadilly Theater, and the funny thing is it did extremely well, and then when Ewan McGregor left, I thought to myself, it's going to take a dump, and it did not.
Good.
It did not. It didn't have anybody with the razzle-dazzle, if you will, of a Ewan McGregor, but it had a very accomplished, his name escapes me, for that matter, a very accomplished actor, and business was terrific. Because Guys and Dolls itself, to some extent, does have a panache.
It's a brand itself.
Yes, it is.
It's a name,
Yes,
yeah,
it
where
is.
people know it. And
Yeah, but the interesting thing to me was a show that is so well known, a brand that is so strong as Guys and Dolls, was still absolutely subservient in one of the theater capitals of the world to Ewan McGregor and Jane
Oh,
Krakowski.
absolutely right.
Absolutely subservient.
There's no question about it, and it will always be thus.
Yeah.
That's why people say theater is dying, theater is no good, and theater is weak, and theater is not. It's as weak as the last show. I mean, you know, one of the great phrases coined by God knows who many years ago, they called Broadway the fabulous invalid. Because every year they say, forget about it, it's dying. Well, it's not. It may be weak now, but you take a look at the grosses. I'm not merely talking about the astronomical prices. I'm talking about shows running for a long, long time. Theaters, you can get into certain theaters in New York because why? Because of the long runs of plays like, Cats closed already, but ran 14 years or whatever it was, and Les Miserables, and Spamalot's going to run forever, and Producers have run for 5 years already. People are lined up, they're queuing up, as they say in England, trying to get into a theater. So guys like you, agencies like you, have their work cut out for them because you have to buy the right time, get the right print, get the right material, and then conclusively and very definitively work with the publicity people to get that message across and get the... What about new audiences? How do you develop young kids that never really went to the theater? How do you get those people?
It's, we talked about it earlier, you talk to them on the internet, you get them where they are. You talk to them in the internet, you talk to them with cell phones, text messaging, and again, you find out what matters to them. What's interesting, a star may or may not resonate with somebody 21 to 25 years old.
That's right.
But a storyline might. We didn't promote any stars with We Will Rock You. It was all the music of Queen. And that's what mattered.
Well, look at Chicago. The revival's been running for 10 years. They just have Usher in it now for about 6 or 7 weeks.
Yep.
And it's packed.
Yeah.
Now, a guy my age, they said, Usher, I thought it was a guy who takes you down the aisle, says, you'll sit right here. What do I know? But Usher is a very big star. And it's a very clever move to do, people of that caliber and that kind of concentration on one area.
I think you'll see more of that too. I think, you know, someday, and this is a crazy notion, but someday you'll see Jay-Z and the producers or something like that, because it's an interesting way to do it. You can the roles are the roles.
Ned just gave us a quizzical look.
I just see more and more pop culture becoming a part of what we consider to be the traditional theater. I'm a little bothered by that.
Well, I mean, we have a show that's very successful here in town, Mamma Mia, which is basically a pop culture phenomenon. It's based on a band that
I know. And
was popular, then disappeared, now all of a sudden has come back again.
With a terrible book and wonderful music.
Yes.
And nobody cares what the book is. The book is contrived and hokey, but it should only happen to me. It's a wonderful book.
It's just the book is just to get you from one song to the next.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
Another
right.
element of what you all do and do so well from a scientific way. I was in a movie once, and I was part of the tour junket. We were going to different cities promoting the movie, and we were late for one of our press tours appearances at a radio station. So we were stuck in traffic, and we're not going anywhere for minutes on end. And the director looked up and he saw this billboard, and we were not there. And he turned around and he asked the marketing person, this obviously is a highly congested area, why aren't we being advertised there? And I never thought about that. These people have to consider who sees what billboards or who reads what newspapers in that respect, especially out in the public as well. That's something that you all consider as well.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, where
Outdoor
people are gonna be seeing
advertising, in
things.
other words.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the exactness of the science varies from medium to medium. You can pinpoint an audience much better in radio or television than you can with an outdoor board in Times Square. On the other hand, the eyeballs, just the pure reach in terms of numbers with an outdoor board in Times Square more than makes up for that lack of absolute rifle certainty as to who you're talking to. You have reach, and then you have frequency and specificity, but there's a lot to be said for just raw numbers.
But that's a lot to know, and I think the average theater goer doesn't know that you would know this information, have this information.
No, right, and the interesting thing is, and the publicist talked about it too, that the key is for the publicity and the public relations and the advertising to all be singing from the same song.
Right.
Otherwise, because people don't understand, they just know what they see. They don't know where they got it, whether it was paid or earned.
One of the most important meetings that take place in the theater, and you would know this as readily as I, and you certainly know it, Nate, is the day after the opening, after the reviews are in, you have a meeting. Either it's a death meeting, or it's a celebratory meeting, or something in
It's a
between.
wake, you make up.
The ad agency, the press agent, the producer, the director, everybody that's involved with it. Okay, what do we do now? If it's great, how do we sell it? Do we use this quote? Do we use that quote? Do we go on the internet now? Because it's expanding. You just mentioned things on cell phones. My God, things are happening in mobilizing audiences to come and see a show that you never envisioned years ago. And it's going to keep on happening. That's why it'll never be the fabulous invalid. It'll be fabulous, but not the invalid.
Never the invalid.
And on that note, I just want to thank Randy Snow very, very much for being with us today.
Randy, thanks for coming.
Thank you so very, very much indeed.
Appreciate it.
It was very good, and we'll see you again very shortly, and when we will learn another aspect of producing for the theater.
It's fantastic and can't be underestimated now and as we move forward with email blasts, with advertising, banner advertising in smart places where theater goers go. I'm a big believer that there's a world of people out there, and this isn't really New York specific, I think this is more city specific. There are a world of people that go to the theater often, and there's everybody else that just doesn't. And there is no way to convince somebody that just doesn't go to the theater that that's the choice that they should make for their Friday or Saturday night. It's just not what they do. So to target theater goers specifically is incredibly useful, and I think that the internet is a great way to do that, because if you're a theater company, a smaller theater company, or a smaller theater trying to produce a brand new world premiere play or musical, to be building up lists of people that are coming to your theater constantly to let them know about the play in advance. I think creating awareness up front, if you have ad dollars to spend, all the upfront you can is where you should put that money, because you want to create the awareness, because if they hear from a reviewer or if they hear from a friend that X show is really, really great and they should see it, it's really that 1 + 1 + 1 that translates into a ticket sale. And the internet, you can create that awareness. You can send out your material, your graphic, via JPEG or PDF. And then you can follow that up with the great critical reaction from the press, or potentially, from consumers, writing in their thoughts about the show. And so you can hit consumers 2, 3, 4 times with follow-up messages, which might help to confirm that they want to buy tickets to your show and not to another show down the street.
Isn't that sort of a new frontier, though, for marketing? You come up with things like PDF and JD and all that stuff that I'm not even familiar with. But I know that it's vitally important to the selling of a show. But isn't it a new kind of a horizon?
Well, it's new that it's only the internet's been around for the last 10 or 15 years.
But nobody ever, until very recently, I don't think any theater events used it to really sell the product until a few years ago.
That's true. I don't think it got into a place technologically where it was feasible to do that. But now with how easy it is to do these email blasts, it's unbelievably useful, and I put that into sort of your grassroots campaign as well. I mean, that is a way to get the word out, to the peeps who really want to, see theater, that you've got something worth seeing. And as opposed to, again, in most major cities, there's more than 1 or 2 shows that open every week or every month, and that's one effective, cost-effective way to get to those people. Also, I think with so many plays opening, that to be reliant exclusively on reviews is a dangerous trap, because you might, at a lot of papers around the country, they have more than one reviewer. They might have your lead theater critic, or they might have, a string of 6, 7, 8 different reviewers, 5 of which may love your play, may think it's the greatest thing that ever was on stage, and you may be assigned the one reviewer that absolutely hates it. So, and then you're stuck with mixed reviews in your town, wherever it is you're producing your play. And I like to come up with campaigns or sells that hopefully can overcome that if the product is good, because ultimately word of mouth is what's at the end of the day going to sell your show. And if we can get enough people into previews and get enough word of mouth going, we're not going to be as reliant on the reviews. If the reviews come out and they happen to be the grand slam home run review that we wanted, well, then your show is off to the stars, and there's no stopping it. But you can't always count on that, even if it's a brilliant show. So I think so what are we selling? How are we going to get the bodies into the seats if the reviews aren't as strong as you want it to be? Zootopia, again, is a great example. It's selling, phenomenally well. It sold very well in Los Angeles. We got a very good review in the Los Angeles Times. In New York, the New York Times gave Zootopia maybe one of the worst reviews I've ever read.
I read it.
Yeah. And
Charles Isherwood, I think.
It was one of his first reviews after coming from Variety to the Times. And the New Yorker gave it a very good review. So it ended up with mixed reviews. But in New York, the New York Times, it's all about the New York Times. Strategically, we were very smart, and we had as many previews as we possibly could in New York in order to build that word of mouth, in order to feed that. So it didn't, if we had gotten a great review in the New York Times, yes, ticket sales would have gone absolutely crazy. But the good news was enough people liked that show that it didn't kill the show, and it's in fact still running in New York.